afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and the distinguished guests. It's time to start the much-awaited award ceremony. I request Madam Madhuri Santanam Sondhi, Chairperson of the Professor M.L. Sondhi Memorial Trust and Director of the M.L. Sondhi Institute for Asia Pacific Affairs, to welcome the guests and the audience. Madam Sondhi, an author and editor, is also an academic of high standing in the field of philosophy, peace and culture. Madam Sondhi.
Good morning, everybody. On behalf of the Professor M.L. Sondhi Memorial Trust and the M.L. Sondhi Institute for Asia Pacific Affairs, I extend a very warm welcome to everyone who has gathered here this afternoon, and especially thank His Holiness the Dalai Lama, who has come down from the cool of Dharamsala to graciously accept the 2016 M.L. Sondhi Prize for International Politics. A special welcome for our chief guest, Arun Shourie, former minister in the Vajpayee government, and to Sri Lalit Mansingh, former foreign secretary, also trustee of the M.L. Sondhi Trust. Also to Kasur Dongjungla, His Holiness's representative at the Delhi Tibet Bureau, to Kalan Tempala, I haven't seen him, I hope he's here, Director of the India and East Asia Office of His Holiness, officials from the Government of India, members of the Diplomatic Corps, members of the Trust, guests from academia and the press, Tibetans and friends of Tibetans. I crave your indulgence for taking advantage of this opportunity to indulge in a few reminiscences, personal reminiscences, about the long association Professor Sondhi and I have enjoyed with His Holiness and with the Tibet issue over the past almost 55 years. I first became aware of Tibet as a schoolgirl when my sister Malati was guide to the Tibetan delegation at the Asian Relations Conference in 1947. Over Chinese objections, Pandit Nehru had issued an invitation to the independent Lhasa government to join the deliberations for a newly awakening Asia. 9 years later, in 1956, he invited His Holiness to visit India for the Buddha Jayanti celebrations. The trip made all the more piquant by the recent Chinese occupation of Tibet. 3 years later, His Holiness, as we all know, was forced to flee Tibet and seek asylum in India. Before ever I met him, I actually heard His Holiness's voice. Not as an esoteric visitation or mystical experience, but quite literally. In the autumn of 1959, I was a student at Oxford and friends with Raghavan Iyer of St. Anthony's College and his wife Nandini, who taught at Lady Margaret Hall. His Holiness's dramatic escape into India had caught the attention of the whole world, preceded by the publication of popular books like 7 Years in Tibet by Heinrich Harrer. So people got to know a little bit about this mysterious kingdom in the Himalayas, Shangri-La of legend. Raghavan was a theosophist, and he soon made a trip to Mussoorie, where His Holiness was camped. He was granted an audience, which he recorded on a bulky recording machine of those days with large spools of tape. Back in Oxford, he replayed that interview to several friends, and thus it was that I heard His Holiness's voice speaking in Tibetan through an interpreter. Most of the conversation centered around esoteric theosophical doctrines, of which I had little understanding, but I was struck by Raghavan's query concerning the problematic of His Holiness's next incarnation. His Holiness responded to Raghavan's question with alacrity, having obviously given much thought to the subject. At this distance in time, I don't remember any specific answers, but I do remember the earnestness and immediacy of the discussion on an issue which till today is central to the legitimacy of any government in Tibet, whether or not His Holiness is a political ruler or not. Raghavan, by the way, was the father of Pico Iyer, the famous travel writer you must be familiar with, who has followed in his father's footsteps, or perhaps even outdistanced them, in his devotion to His Holiness and the cause of Tibet. M.L. Sondhi had also studied at Oxford. He knew the Ayers, and by 1959 he was posted in Prague as a diplomat. He had been deeply shocked and disturbed at the news of His Holiness being forced to leave Tibet. He wrote to the Ministry of External Affairs in Delhi asking that his next posting be in Lhasa. The request was rejected, and he reached the United Nations instead, where despite the Indian delegation's disapproving leader, whom some might remember, Krishna Menon, sat in on the debates of Tibet. On his return to India in early 1962, he resigned from the IFS. I also returned about the same time, and the year turned out to be altogether memorable. I soon met Sepon Shagappa, the then Tibet Bureau representative. Shortly after, M.L. Sondhi and I met and married in July, and some months later, on Gandhiji's birthday, along with like-minded friends, we set up the Tibet Swaraj Committee, publishing informational booklets and articles, organizing meetings, etc., etc. The Chinese entered Indian territory 18 days later, on October 20th, and amongst the flurry of measures taken by the unprepared Indian government was a public appeal asking citizens to donate ornaments for armaments. His Holiness reached Delhi that critical week in October, and newspapers reported that he presented the Indian government with gold dust towards the war effort, one of the many occasions on which he has publicly expressed solidarity with India. And on that visit, Professor Sondhi and I were privileged to meet him face-to-face for the first time. So really, Tibet, one way or another, has been an intimate part of our own life story. Its highlights include the Nobel Peace Prize for His Holiness, for which M.L. Sondhi was the Indian nominator. He played a role as intermediary, leading to meetings with Václav Havel of then Czechoslovakia, just on the eve of his becoming president. He facilitated His Holiness's first visit to Israel and contact with the Druze community. Professor Sondhi was always convinced that His Holiness's presence in India, accompanied by learned Buddhist lamas, would be a catalyst for an Indian renaissance, as the Christians forced to flee Constantinople had energized thinking and learning in Europe. That was a Freudian slip. If I may add just a few words about His Holiness, the Tibet question and his more universal concerns, like his great predecessor, the 13th Dalai Lama, His Holiness has been acutely aware of the need for Tibet to modernize her education, society, and government while retaining and upgrading the best in her received culture. But whereas the 13th had to wage an uphill battle against conservatism on the sheltered plateau, His Holiness has managed to bring about some spectacular changes during his stay in India, of which I mention only three. One is the introduction of a democratic political process currently confined to the life of the exile community, but a microcosm of what could be one day replicated inside Tibet, if not throughout the whole of China. Another is his explorative dialogue with the scientific knowledge process that undergirds modernity, accepting its indubitable discoveries while offering insights on certain of its epistemological and psychospiritual implications. The third is His Holiness's emphasis on moral values, responding to certain systemic problems arising out of Enlightenment rationality, where human responsibilities have yielded place to the primacy of rights, and where cultural diversity raises doubts about the universality of ethics. His Holiness emphasizes secular ethics beyond civilizational particularities to enable positive coexistence in our increasingly globalized world. With these few words, I again welcome and thank His Holiness for accepting the Professor M.L. Sondhi Prize for International Politics, which I take as a token of his affection for Professor Sondhi, with his abiding interest in the fate of the Tibetan people and his unshakable faith in their future. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Sondhi. May I now request Dr. Vivekananda L. Sondhi, an outstanding scholar in the field of mathematics and finance, to present the citation. Dr. Vivekananda.
Good morning. The Professor M.L. Sondhi Memorial Trust and the M.L. Sondhi Institute for Asia Pacific Affairs instituted a prize for international politics in 2006 in honor of the late Professor M.L. Sondhi, to be given annually for, I quote, an outstanding contribution relevant to India to the theory or practice of international politics, end quote. Today, in the case of His Holiness, we have someone who has made an outstanding contribution to both theory and practice of international politics that are relevant to India, Asia, and the world. His Holiness's words have always been internationally relevant, more so since his arrival in India in 1959. There are some recurrent themes amongst his political observations, and I will briefly touch upon a few that are relevant to this occasion. Almost 30 years ago, in September 1987, in his address to the United States Human Rights Caucus, His Holiness proposed a 5-point plan to bring peace to Tibet. The 5 points were detailed further in a speech in Strasbourg in 1988, and though the points essentially remained the same, he has elaborated and refined them in various speeches and writings over the years. One of the points of His Holiness's middle way is that Tibet should be turned into a zone of peace. Thus, His Holiness enriches the idea of a buffer state separating two large powers. In the case of Tibet, China and India. So the idea of buffer states as a demilitarized zone, a zone of ahimsa that allows two major powers to pull back their troops and installations far enough to reduce, if not eliminate, threat perceptions. His idea applies to several present-day conflicts, for example in Crimea and Ukraine, and in the Middle East, where one or both sides in the conflict have shown insatiable appetite for power and territorial expansion to the detriment of all. The would-be peacemakers, rather than exploring the possibility of buffer areas or zone of peace, search instead for legal arrangements between essentially opposed or irreconcilable parties. The second idea of His Holiness that I want to touch upon is that of genuine autonomy for Tibet. It embodies the need for political expression of a people with a long history and sophisticated culture, a distinct identity. By avoiding emotionally charged or rigid constructs, His Holiness has been able to revisit the idea of genuine autonomy in changing local and global circumstances and suggest proposals that will meet the aspirations of the Tibetan people and benefit China as well as Tibet. His Holiness says in one of his speeches, and I quote, "Because of the economic development and for many other reasons, the world is becoming smaller today. Under those circumstances, the concept of complete independence is not very meaningful." End quote. We can make a comparison with the recent Brexit and Scottish referendums held in Britain and the current political situation in the United Kingdom. The British voter seemingly rejected European Union membership, but it would very much like to hold on to many of the gains that come from the interdependence of the several nations within the European Union. The Scottish Nationalist Party, while wanting full expression for the historical, cultural, and political distinctiveness of Scotland, is not envisioning a combative relationship with England. Indeed, Alex Salmond would like to keep the Queen as the head of state of an independent Scotland. So it seems that the flexibility of political structures lie at the heart of Brexit, Scottish, Tibetan, and other such disputes, whether a state like China or the United Kingdom or supranational configurations like the European Union are ready to accommodate genuine autonomy for the constituent nationalities, more generally for political structures to secure the right balance between interdependence and autonomy. In the information supersaturated political debates in much of the democratic world, we are now faced with the systematic misrepresentation of facts, which is nowadays referred to as post-truth, employed by one or more sides involved in the political processes. But post-truth has been around for a while. For example, it was a daily fact of life in totalitarian regimes like the erstwhile Soviet system and has always been the case in communist China. His Holiness has always battled post-truth with truth, and today more than ever, it is refreshing to read his writings or hear him speak. For example, he refuses to meet a Chinese precondition to say that Tibet was always part of China, and he continues to speak for the hopes and aspirations of all of the 6 million Tibetans. There is an apt quote from His Holiness's address at the Congressional Gold Medal Ceremony in Washington, D.C. in October 2007. I quote, "Another major concern of the Chinese government is the lack of legitimacy in Tibet. Whereas I cannot rewrite the past, a mutually agreeable solution could bring legitimacy, and I am certainly prepared to use my position and influence among the Tibetan people to bring consensus on this question." End quote. Before I read out the citation for the M.L. Sondhi Prize for 2016 for His Holiness the Dalai Lama, let me first quote an excerpt from an article that Professor Sondhi wrote in October 1989 that could well serve as the citation for today's function. In the article entitled "The Return of Tibet to World Politics," Professor Sondhi wrote, and I quote, "From its inception, the Dalai Lama's diplomacy in exile has stressed the interdependence of national interests and universal human goals in accordance with the Buddhistic rejection of militarized systematic conflicts. The Dalai Lama's new thinking has long reflected some of the serious concerns which Gorbachev has made popular since the assumption of office as Secretary General in 1985. The Dalai Lama oriented his conduct in foreign affairs by stressing the interdependent nature of the world. He did not accept the wisdom of the nuclearized bipolar world and identified Tibetan ethos with improvements in the global and regional security through a demilitarized and denuclearized status for Tibet. His readiness to search for agreed solutions even with China, which had indulged in horrendous repressive and destructive activities against the Tibetans, signified a rare intellectual awareness of the need to improve the political climate of the world in the interest of human survival." End quote. And finally, now let me read the citation for the 2016 M.L. Sondhi Prize for International Politics. The Professor M.L. Sondhi Prize for 2016 is presented to His Holiness Tenzin Gyatso, 14th Dalai Lama of Tibet, spiritual leader and global statesman, in recognition of his principled commitment to non-violence in the course of his tireless advocacy of the rights of the Tibetan people and nurturance of democratic self-governance amongst them. He has campaigned against all form of religious persecution and political oppression the world over, promoting dialogue between faiths and cultures and also between science and spirituality. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Vivekananda Sondhi. May I now request one of our distinguished diplomats, Sri Lalit Mansingh, to make his exordial remarks on this occasion. Mr. Mansingh has had a very significant tenure as Foreign Secretary and India's ambassador to USA around the time when the unprecedented 4/11 had happened, marking the beginning of the most critical phase of the 21st century. I request Mr. Mansingh to make his remarks.
Your Holiness, Sri Arun Shourie ji, Srimati Madhuri Sondhi ji, very distinguished dignitaries in the audience, ladies and gentlemen. This must be one of the most poignant occasions for the M.L. Sondhi Memorial Trust. During his long career as a diplomat, as a politician, as an academic, Professor Sondhi pursued many causes, but none of these matched in terms of passion, commitment, and dedication with his championship of the Tibetan cause. I have scanned Professor Sondhi's lectures and writings over a period of 3 decades. Even as events unfolded, he remained consistent in his view that Tibet was the central issue in Sino-Indian relations, and the solutions offered by His Holiness the Dalai Lama represents the best opportunity for the future of the region. It's interesting that in 2002, Professor Sondhi constituted a study group to assess the future of India-China relations and the implications for peace in the region. With the title India, Tibet and China, published somewhere around 2003, the report of the study group analyzed the letters addressed by His Holiness to the then Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi between 1985 and 1987. Professor Sondhi's brief commentaries on those letters reflect his disappointment that the Prime Minister and the Government of India ignored the deeply serious and thoughtful advice given by His Holiness. Professor Sondhi credibly concluded that all Prime Ministers of India, from Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru to Prime Minister P.V. Narasimha Rao, with the exception, he writes, of Mrs. Indira Gandhi, were complicit in following a policy of appeasement towards China. Now, some of you here may wonder what His Holiness the Dalai Lama has got to do with a prize which is about politics. Well, interestingly, in that little booklet on India, China, and Tibet, I found that Professor Sondhi has analyzed the geopolitical thinking of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, including his thoughts on nuclear proliferation. He came to the conclusion that His Holiness's thinking on politics and international affairs matched the views of the school of realpolitik. According to him, His Holiness followed von Clausewitz insofar as power politics is concerned, but remained confident that eventually the middle path of Buddhism will prevail. The report concluded, and I quote, "The Chinese have a historic opportunity to make progress towards peace in the lifetime of the Dalai Lama. If they reject his offer, another opportunity may not come their way." The report concludes that India and China are both at the crossroads of their destiny, and Tibet holds the key to both. Unquote. That was a wise advice given by Professor Sondhi in 2003, and I would say it remains unchanged even today. There are small signals that the Government of India may be finally changing its policy on Tibet. Earlier initiatives about inhibitions by the Government of India about giving prominence to the meetings of His Holiness with Indian dignitaries seem to have disappeared. The stout defense of the visit of His Holiness last week to Arunachal Pradesh and to Tawang, to me, was a rare affirmation by India of its sovereignty and its strategic autonomy. India has also, in the last 6 years, dropped any reference to the One China policy in all our joint communiques and statements with China. These are straws in the wind, and I cherish the hope that, like thousands of other friends of Tibet, the Government of India is finally paying attention to the wise counsel of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. His Holiness came to India under tragic circumstances 58 years ago when he was just 22 years of age. India has been blessed with his radiant presence on our soil. He is 81 years now, and I speak, I think, for all of you and for millions of others in wishing him long life and good health to pursue his threefold mission of leading the Tibetan people, guiding the Buddhists of the world, and working for a better world through harmony amongst all religions. This occasion calls for felicitations but not to His Holiness. I think the felicitations are due to the ML Sondhi Foundation for bringing the spirit and the memory of Professor Sondhi to his greatest political and spiritual mentor, His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shri Lalit Mansingh ji. May I now request our chief guest, Padma Bhushan, Dr. Arun Shourie, an eminent intellectual of our time, whose contributions to the discourses on the frontiers of economy and politics are most widely read and debated. I request Shri Lalit Mansingh ji to present a shawl to His Holiness the Dalai Lama. I request Madam Sondhi to present the plaque to His Holiness. I also request Madam Sondhi to hand over the award check to His Holiness. May I request now Dr. Shourie to give his own speech.
So as Your Holiness, as Mr. Lalit Mansingh was just reminding us, in almost every case, when an award is conferred on a person, the person is honored. But in the rarest of rare cases, when a person accepts an award, the award is honored. It was said of Goswami Tulsidas that Goswami Tulsidas was not famous because he wrote poetry, but poetry was famous because Tulsidas wrote it. So also in the case of the Dalai Lama, in accepting the award, everybody who has received this award in the past and everybody who will receive this award in the future will be able to say, I am getting the award which the Dalai Lama got. He is what the Japanese would call one of the world's living treasures. And his moral authority is visible every time. He has no army, he has no air force, he has no aircraft carriers. But when he goes from one place to the other or says one sentence to the other, the whole Chinese government reacts. So I am reminded in this about Mahatma Gandhi. So in an article, Vinoba Bhave has written that there will be a Congress meeting going on. In those days, no loudspeakers and so on, big congregation. And people in the end, they are drinking tea, somebody is smoking, somebody is talking, and Pandit Nehru will shout. And they will keep quiet for 2 minutes, and after 5 minutes they will start talking again. Then he will take out he used to have a small baton. He will take out the baton, go down, and do this. And they will then keep quiet for 7 minutes. After that they'll start doing again. Then Sardar Patel would be sitting on the dais. Sardar Patel will just tell some of his men, that you go there. So when the Sardar's people came, everybody kept quiet for 15 minutes. Then they will start again. But when Gandhiji walked in, then automatically a hush will settle on the audience. And if anybody talked on one side, Gandhiji will only do, everybody will keep quiet. That is moral authority. So if he does this, or if he doesn't do this, the Chinese try to read. What does he mean by doing this? What does he mean by not doing this? His resilience, that in spite of everything that has been visited upon the people and on his own life, he remains cheerful, he remains have goodwill for everybody. And sir, I'm reminded of an interview of yours with the New York Times. The correspondent asked him that there's so much persecution, you have suffered so much, but you are still smiling. So why? How? So he says, you see, the Chinese have taken so much from us. They have destroyed our monasteries. They are trying to erase our religion. They have wiped out our history. So I thought, why should I also give them the peace of my mind? And it is because of him, really, because of this one single individual, that you look at refugees from anywhere. They are always so bitter and so despondent and so pessimistic. But he has kept the spirits of the Tibetan refugees high. And because of him, the issue of Tibet has become a world concern. And actually, when you read what he has written, when you hear his discourses or his commentaries on a text, you see how learned a person he is, and yet how lightly he wears his learning. And I think we underestimate the extent of transformation which he has brought about in Buddhist practices and Buddhist doctrine, and in opening up something which should be really an example to all of us in India, in approaching even his own tradition with an open mind. He's saying that Buddhism must face facts. And if new scientific discoveries are at discord with something written long ago, then we have to adjust to that fact. There is no other leader of any tradition, certainly not of ours, in which case we are so protective of our gods and of our gurus that we do not want to open them for any examination at all. So the openness of his mind is an example for us which we should emulate, and it is also testimony to his great confidence in the tradition, that ultimately even new scientific discoveries will validate the great truths which were discovered by the Buddhist Indian tradition. So therefore the award is richly deserved. It goes without saying, but I want to make a special request to the trustees like Mrs. Sondhi, Vivekananda and Lalit Mansingh. We should also institute another special award. And that is that there is no spiritual leader in the world who has made us laugh as much as the Dalai Lama has made us laugh. Whenever people gather who have heard him, the conversation always comes to what the joke they heard. So just day before yesterday, I was in Bangalore talking to one of our big sociologists and writers, Ramchandra Guha, and he described himself. He said, I'm a very restless person, very nervous person. I'm always anxious about the next thing I have to do. But once I felt I was completely at peace. And that is when I heard the Dalai Lama speak. And in the question and answer period, somebody asked a very long question, very complicated question of how much responsibilities he had, and how his family was, and he didn't have money, and there was sickness, and he was this and that. He said, I can't even now sleep at night. So what is your recommendation? Dalai Lama said, have you tried a drink? Stiff drink. Sound sleep, happiness in the morning. So, Then, just now, you were mentioning, sir, about reincarnation. Mrs. Sondhi was mentioning how she first heard the dialogue on reincarnation. There was an exchange that Kushwant Singh wrote about with His Holiness. He was asking him, do you believe in reincarnation? And then what is the proof? And the Dalai Lama said, but some children remember their previous lives. And he was giving arguments for that. For each of them, Kushwant Singh would give something, the opposite argument. And it went on. And then the Dalai Lama looked at him and said, Mr. Singh, if I did not believe in reincarnation, I would be out of business. So I congratulate of course the Dalai Lama for receiving the award, for accepting the award, but even more so the foundation for choosing such a worthy person to venerate with the award. And I again renew my plea that there should be a special award for a person who in even our times keeps our spirits so high. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Arun Shourie. May I now humbly request His Holiness the Dalai Lama to address the audience on compassion and global responsibility. I know he doesn't need any introduction to this audience. His Holiness the Dalai Lama.
Dear respected brothers, sisters, and rest of brothers and sisters, I always stress we are same human being. I truly believe that. I always consider I am one of the 7 billion human beings. In mysterious level or reincarnation or something. But obviously, nobody should argue we are same human being. I really feel now time come, we have to stress oneness of 7 billion human beings. Because there's a lot of problem, including killing. Actually unthinkable. And more sort of also the serious thing is, with the name of religion, fighting, killing. All major religious tradition is actually a source of compassion. All major religious tradition carry same message of love, compassion, forgiveness, tolerance, self-discipline. Now, that very thing are causing division, killing. I think our environment is something wrong. Now it is humanity's responsibility to change that, not through preaching, not through prayer, but through action, in order to carry realistic, holistic action. Firstly, we must develop clear vision here. And not only mere just a vision, we need as a determination with optimism. So I always share, whenever I give talk, we are same human being. I want happiness, joyfulness, and the rest of the 7 billion human being, everyone want happy life. So, meantime,
many problems, as I briefly mentioned, many problems essentially our own creation. Now some hopeful sign is, according to some scientific sort of research, now they make conclusion, basic human nature is more compassionate. So therefore, there is real hope if we make effort, realistically, with determination. I think my lifetime may not achieve, but later part of 21st century could be more peaceful world, more compassionate world, if we make an effort now. So I mentioned, you see, this young boy, when I met, his eyes, very fresh, very nice. So I told him, this young Indian is a generation who can create a better future. In India's case, more compassionate India. And then, like you, millions and millions of young people of the world. Say, I usually describe like your age. I consider I describing generation of 21st century. So, in this century, just the beginning. So, if we make effort now, and systematic way, and realistic way, with determination, then I think your later part of your life, you can see better world. The generation of 20th century, we will not see. I think better to say the involve difficult world. We may go heaven, relax. So anyway, sometimes I really feel, and also you see, telling the generation of 20th century, that means you see people whose age 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. It seems, you see, we create more trouble on this planet. So generation of 20th century. So now, actually, we create a lot of work to solve by this generation of 21st century. So, in sense, we really need a sense of oneness of humanity. A Tibet issue, all these. This is too much emphasis. My nation, my culture, my language. So I really admire the European Union's spirit. In the past, many centuries, fighting, killing each other in the name of their sovereignty. Then after Second World War, they realized, now we have to think the common interest and share each other. So the European Union, the spirit of European Union, I think very realistic, and I think I think very, very important. So I always say, telling the spirit of European Union eventually, you see, should create African Union. Then a lot of problem, including fighting, killing, I think can reduce. And then a lot of money spent for weapon that can use because of promotion, the farm system and some sort of industries like that. One of my empty sort of dream is Sahara. There plenty of solar energy. Now that we should use solar energy and create electricity. That electricity not use industry or some other thing, but desalination. Seawater turned to sweet water. Then I think a large area of Sahara can be Greenland. I think billion, I think 1 or 2 billion human beings life, you see, can provide food on these things. Similarly, Australia, last few years, I'm telling, Australia should make effort from all sides. You see, each decade, 100 kilometers or 200 inward, and planting more trees, and again, you see, use seawater like that. So we have the technology because of desalination. So that is wonderful. Then I think many sort of positive side effect. Seawater can check. No matter global warming, we extensively use seawater. Then I think we can. Otherwise, it's Calcutta or Shanghai or Tokyo. I think within a few decades may submerge. Right. Submerge. So like that. So now time come, we have to think seriously for promotion of sense of oneness of humanity. Now there, the compassion, sense of concern of others' well-being is the key factor. And with that, sense of global responsibility. I myself, when I think I am one of the human beings, so when I met people, so no barrier. Immediately become very close. If I stress, I'm Dalai Lama, something very special. Then that sort of the mental attitude create barrier. So out of 7 billion human beings, only one Dalai Lama. If I too much emphasis Dalai Lama, then I become lonely person. When I think we human beings, human brothers, sisters, then this side, when I look, human brothers, and beautiful because of younger sisters or brothers. At this side, experienced old brothers, sisters. So then feel we are same. No need formality, no need the diplomatic smile. I think you have some experience. We just express our nature. Right? So now, these days, I am talking. Firstly, we have to work, try to educate our younger generation. The warm-heartedness, compassionate sort of mind is not part of religious practice. It's just something very relevant to humanity. If we have more a compassionate mind, firstly, your physical health much better. Now some scientists also say the constant fear, constant anger is actually eating our immune system. more compassionate mind, more calm mind, very, very helpful to sustain your immune system. So in this respect, look my face. Now 82-year-old person, seems quite handsome. So some people, some my long-time friend, when we met, they expressed to me, since many years, you see, your face not much change. So then they asked me, what's your secret? Then I, firstly, I jokingly telling, my secret, I don't want to share with other people. Then I seriously explain, nothing. The peace of mind, it really makes differences. Then peace of mind, not because of the lembacheche, through dullness way. I think with dullness way. Not much thinking, not much idea, and comparatively peace. Not that way. My mind quite sharp. The other day in Arunachal, you say one BJP scientist, secretary or something. You see, a few days we become very close friend. Then I told him, each night I spend 9 hours sleep. Then morning 3 o'clock wake up, and next for 5 hours meditation. So that meditation sharpening my mind. So with sharp mind I can I can cheating other people more easily, more wisely. That since we become quite a friend, a close friendship feeling. So then he responded me, he only 6 hours sleep, so he cannot cheat other people. So the peace of mind, really very important for our physical health. And also, you see, peace of mind, you see, create, I think, the basis of human intelligence properly. Too much emotion, then, you see, because of that create some kind of, because of the blocks or obstacle, our intelligence objectively look, study, and analyze. So in order to objectively analyze things, our mind must be calm. So therefore, irrespective of whether religious believer or not, human compassion is the key factor which we learned from our mother, from our parent. And as I mentioned earlier, basic human nature is more compassionate. So now, the drawback is existing education system, modern education system, is very much oriented about material value, external value, not much talk about our inner value. So we already now committed, with help of some scientists and some educationists. You see, we are trying to enrich existing education system, including some education about our inner value. Strictly follow Indian tradition, secular way, not based on religion, but scientific findings and our common sense and common experience. So I fully committed promotion these things. And then now spent 58 years in this country. So I developed full conviction. Religious harmony is very possible. So, some part of the world, as I mentioned earlier, religion also is causing some problem. That due to, because of the narrow-minded. Look from wider. Then India is one example. Most populated, democratic, ancient nation. All world majority tradition live together. Occasionally some problem. That is understandable. But overall, I think wonderful religious harmony exists in this country over, I think, 2,000 years, to 3,000 years. So therefore, it is possible, religious harmony. So I fully committed promotion that. So these, you see, my sort of what's the commitment possible because the Chinese communist sort of what's the suppression inside Tibet, and I escaped. If I still in Bodala or Nurbulinga, I think I may be more orthodox Lama. because you see, come to India, political asylum, then you see, find a lot of opportunity meeting with people, particularly scientists. Nowadays, I describe myself half Buddhist monk, half scientist. And actually, you see, I think some of you may know. So one of Buddha's statement, you see, mentioned, "Oh, my follower, monks, scholars, should not accept my teaching out of faith, out of devotion, but rather thorough investigation and experiment." That's a very scientific way. So some of the Nalanda master rejected Buddha's own teaching. You see, they mention certain Buddhist teaching, some text, some sutra. They mentioned, if you accept literally what this particular sutra mentioned, then it goes against reason. Therefore, we must reject that. That's quite unique. So, I have liberty to reject some of our traditional belief, such as Mount Meru. I publicly now reject. Yeah. Obviously, I think almost daily, I think thousands of people, you see, flying from India to Europe or India to Japan and then America, Canada, like that. So nobody see Mount Meru. So therefore, you see, although it's a certain Buddhist text like Abhidhamma Koshakarika wrote by Bosuband, it's a very detailed explanation, the height and size, the Mount Meru. And the Kalachakra Tantra also is mentioned that. So, with respect, I reject. So we have that liberty. Good. So then finally, of course, I prefer some question and answer, the more sort of interaction. I prefer that. And then lastly, when I heard the late Professor Sondhi's a memorial or something, I reflect those days. He really showing genuine concern about Tibet. And some of his sort of idea he mentioned at that time. At that time I felt, oh, that's unrealistic. Now seems some of his idea is, I think, truly far-sighted sort of ideas. So he, I think one of the great supporter of Tibet issue. And every supporters of Tibetan issue is, I usually describe, not pro-Tibetan, but rather pro-justice. Since our problem is very much based on truth and compassion. I think since 8th century, Nalanda master Shantarakshita invited by Tibetan emperor. Since then, we follow sincerely, seriously, they follow Nalanda tradition. Mainly through study and practice. Study, average 20-30 years, rigorous study. The root text memorize by heart. Then commentary wrote by Nalanda masters. Each word explained by teacher. And then use extensively logic, through logical way, debate. So that's, I think, unique among whole Buddhist world. So therefore, you see, Tibetan Buddhist tradition is truly the Nalanda tradition. So, preservation of Tibetan culture, Tibetan Buddhist tradition, is not only concern for 6 million Tibetan people, but the whole, the Buddhist world. And then also, basic Buddhist way of approach is, I think, very, very open. So now many scientists also now showing a genuine interest. So for example, quantum physics, very similar that of Buddhist sort of philosophy, mathematical philosophy. I think one time, I think many of you knows Raja Ramana. Raja Ramana, you see, told one occasion, or meeting, the quantum physics in the world, in modern world, something new concept. But in this country, 2000 years ago, already developed that concept. So it is true. So like that, and then I think the India really can make significant contribution for inner peace, not through prayer, as I mentioned earlier, not through prayer, not through belief, but fuller knowledge about the whole system of our emotion, our mind. Then, you see, we better equipped to tackle our destructive emotions, such as anger. So these knowledge, not only ancient Indian knowledge, but also relevant to today's world. So I'm trying to make the contribution as much as from our sort of experience, our knowledge, which come from India. And then, meantime, now last, you see, 1 or 2 years, I now fully convinced now within this country, the ancient Indian knowledge must revive. So then you feel grateful to Chela. We are Chela. You are Guru. So once you know how much precious thing we Chela get, then we are not only refugee, but eventually become Guru. The ancient Guru become Chela. So in any way, so that I think around 400 million Chinese now follow Buddhism. Now Buddhist population. Now I think among world, different country, I think China is the biggest number Buddhist population. And many of these Buddhists gradually realize Tibetan Buddhist tradition is authentic Nalanda tradition. So many of them eager to follow Tibetan Buddhist tradition. So Government of India and many of our friends, including late Professor Sondhi, they immensely help to us, small refugee community. Now, after more than 50 years, now situation becomes such. Now we can make some significant contribution, not only India, but also eventually in China. So like that. So I think Kasoda, remember Kasoda review these past a few decades, and then like Professor Sondhi's and Pandit Nehru, these are very, very kind to us. So we never forget. So quite logical. And our relation is relation between Guru and Chela. So logically, when Chela facing some problem, Guru have some moral responsibility. So you've done that. Thank you. So some question.
His Holiness, we are so very grateful to you for such a wonderful speech, which has actually opened a window for most of us as a process of learning. Lot of things that we think about but don't apply in our life. Now, His Holiness, you have mentioned about the generation, the young generation, and we have here little Master Raghav Sondhi, who would like to present you a book which is a collection of Professor Sondhi's select writings on India's foreign policy, just recently published under Professor M.L. Sondhi Trust, and edited by Harsh V. Pant, who is also an eminent scholar. Raghav, may I request you to also present a book to our former ambassador, Sri Lalit Mansingh? Not to?
One chocolate.
That's great. Yeah. After such a wonderful speech delivered by His Holiness, I think we may have some time for Q&A. And I would request Dr. Vivekananda Sondhi to conduct the Q&A session. Dr. Vivekananda Sondhi, please take this chair.
Your Holiness, I am Vijay Naik. I'm a journalist. I have very fond memories of meeting you some years back in Dharamshala. My question to you is that when the whole world listens to you, and your advice, why the Chinese are not listening to you? Do you think that there is something missing in your power of persuasion? Thank you.
We have to make distinction. Chinese government and Chinese people, even government, many Chinese officials, I notice there's many retired officials, like ordinary Chinese. When we met, they really showing genuine warm feeling. And nowadays, every week I meet some Chinese from mainland China, 15, 20 every week. Whenever we meet these Chinese from mainland China, always tear. So Chinese people, as a people, wonderful. But then this system, political system, not only Tibetan, but also their own people, such as Tiananmen massacre. You see, the whole system, totalitarian system. I often, you see, telling, when I met some Chinese and some retired officials also, I telling them, 3 or 4 billion Chinese people have every right to know the reality. Once you see people knows the reality, 1.3 or 4 billion Chinese people also have the ability to judge what is right, what is wrong. So the censorship and distorted information is morally wrong. Oh, de, Amala, Madaji.
This way.
I always refer to her, my mother, Mataji. So she also, you see, her own sort of attitude towards me, dear son. Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. Bless you, my son.
So, I think the totalitarian system, not much future. So the leaders, I think they really desperately fighting how to keep their power. So look, former Soviet Union, and most or many Eastern European countries, you see, they try to keep their sort of totalitarian system, but eventually, you see, since that is very artificial, many party member, outwardly they are faithful party member, but inside different. So how can keep that system, that situation for long? Very difficult. And meantime now Chinese, because economic condition improve, so number of Chinese tourists place touring different places, and many Chinese, including many Chinese leaders, their children educating in foreign countries. So things definitely will change. And other side, Tibetan spirit inside Tibet, very strong. Over now 60 years, the hardliner communists, they use various methods, but completely fail to change Tibetan spirit. So therefore, as you mentioned, this single person, you see, quite troublesome for Chinese government. Because the Tibetan people trust me like that. Yes? Next question?
Thank you. Your Holiness, coincidentally, the question you have just explained now, the fag end of communism is going to come very soon. I happened to predict in 1969 in one of my books meant for Indian Foreign Service, Indian Administrative Service, specially written on an essay on Czechoslovakia, the rape of Czechoslovakia and after. It happened that the fag end of 20th century will see the fizzling and floundering of communism. It is a good news, it happened. But anyhow, my question is that the means by which we live have outdistanced the ends for which we live. Our scientific power has outrun our spiritual power. And if I add the last line, we have guided missiles and misguided men. How Your Holiness reacts to this phenomena, which is also engulfing the modern world in a big way because of this bastard materialism which we are having on planet Earth?
Main question? That's true. As I mentioned earlier, our existing education system is not adequate to bring healthy mind. So therefore, you see, we already involved. And here, some scientists also, you see, have the strong view existing education system not adequate. So just this morning I met some people, and now tomorrow we roughly finalize, and then after some time, I think 2 to 3 months, we greater sort of conference meeting, then the finalize drafting about curriculum of secular ethics. Then firstly, you see here, I think India, also in many, my friends, they are ready to carry experiment, you see, this new curriculum. So it is true, but things are changing now. Many scholars, many scientists now showing because of dissatisfaction about existing education system. Spiritual. Now, among the spirituality, is basically 2 groups. One group, theistic religion, believe creator, and another, the rest of the world religion is theistic. The non-theistic religion, in Indian religion, Jainism, and one part of Sankhyaism, very ancient Indian tradition. Then Buddhism. These 3 non-theistic religion, no concept of creator, but ourselves as a creator. Not yet finished. So I always telling people or expressing, once my mouth open, blah 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 blah, go that. So that is one of my weakness. So now, the non-theistic religion is concerned, particularly Buddhism, as I mentioned earlier. Reason, investigation is key factor for our own practice also, not just prayer, not just shamatha, analytical meditation, analyze what's the reality. Like quantum physics, very similar. The scientists, quantum physics, just you see, they find something intellectually. We implement that theory. So in order to reduce the power of ignorance, ultimate ignorance. So therefore, now the quantum physics, very similar. However, the quantum physicists now they say external thing not exist by objectively, but finally observer. It depends on observer. Now the next question, where is observer? A scientist, no answer. Not yet, modern science not yet developed to investigate where is mind or where is self, not yet. So on that level, ancient Indian sort of philosophy, because they already now see things very much depend on observer side. So the observer, some I think except Buddhism, all I think all religion, including ancient Indian non-theistic religion, also you see accept the concept of Atma, something permanent, previous life to this life, from this life next life. The Buddha Dharma, Anatma theory, no independent self. Anatma does not mean nothing exists about self. No. But self is designated on the combination of mind and body. And mind and body, also you see, grosser level of mind and body, more subtle level, body and mind, very subtle level, body and mind. So these very detailed explanation there. So now, more and more discussion with scientists. See, number of scientists now really showing genuine interest. Now psychology is concerned. The modern psychology, compare ancient Indian psychology, modern psychology looks like kindergarten level. Ancient Indian psychology highly developed. Now the only problem is you, traditionally our guru, I think neglected about this knowledge. Yes.
Your Holiness, I am a journalist from UNI. My question is, would you share with us your visit to Arunachal Pradesh, and do you find Government of India is becoming more assertive now and in dealing with the Tibetan issue vis-a-vis China?
Correct, those. I think before my visit take place, I asked concerned Indian ministry. Then Government of India say, no problem, go ahead. Then I visited. Then some reaction from Chinese side, quite unusual. So I don't know. So fortunately, while I was in Tawang, no because of the intrusion way, very close from Tawang and the border. So if some Chinese soldier come, then I may certainly leaving Tawang. But fortunately, that not happen. So I think these things, like I think North Korea and America, you see the one way looks very serious, but in reality, nobody dare real sort of fighting. So Chinese also, I feel like that. India, not small country, and military power also now, India, you see, gaining. So therefore, the only thing is compromise, nothing else. So therefore, and then also, you see, the Chinese, when you see think about the conflict with India, they have to think about situation inside Tibet. So then, double sort of responsibility. Firstly, control Tibetan, and facing with the Indian army. Not easy. Like that. So Chinese hardliner consider me troublemaker. So troublemaker, I think, demonstrated as a troublemaker. Okay, next question.
Your Holiness, I'm a journalist as well from the New York Times. And I have another question about your visit to Tuang. The people of that region have for many years expressed a desire, even a longing, to be the site of the birth of the next Dalai Lama. And my question to you is, according to your understanding of the doctrine, of the teachings, does it matter whether the people of a region are welcoming or indifferent or hostile? Does that have any bearing on reincarnation itself?
그렇죠. That point, I didn't pay much attention. Few years ago, in Newark, near New York, once on my lecture, and then beside that, meeting some media people. Then one media asked me about reincarnation, the 15th Dalai Lama. So then I take my glass and look at his face. Then, do you think reincarnation is quite hurry or not? And he said, no hurry, no hurry, no hurry. So, actually, as early as 1969, one of my official statements, I stated the very institution of Dalai Lama should continue or not up to Tibetan people. Not important. Important is teaching. So in this country, now all major monastic institutions re-established in India, mainly in Karnataka state. So over now 40 years, 50 years, the younger generation becoming good scholar. So they will carry our, let's say, the 1,000-year-old tradition which we kept from Nalanda tradition. So now this younger generation, they certainly, you see, carry the full responsibility to preserve. So that's more important. In Tibetan sort of society, the Lama institution considers something important. That is not very important. Actually, there is no Buddha's institution, Buddha's reincarnation, no Nagarjuna's institution, no Nagarjuna's sort of, or say, reincarnation. But they are teaching. Still remain. So we study and we meditate on it. So that's the way Buddha's teaching is more sacred than Buddha himself. So Tibetan, you see, they eventually, you see, invented the Lama institution. They're sometimes helpful, sometimes harmful. So now key thing is study. The whole, this time also, I asked, you see, people in Men, in Tawang, your sort of unshakable faith is good, but the faith remain, blind faith is not much sort of benefit. You must study. I always emphasizing that from Ladakh up to Arunachal, all these monasteries or temples eventually should be learning center and must carry some program for study. Just faith. And some Lama carry some rituals, outdated, really, I feel. Yes?
May I add one other reason that he gave on another occasion for that the question can be kept pending for some time. our son and my wife, and we had gone to call on him, and he insisted on walking my wife. She has difficulty in walking because of Parkinson's, to the lift. So when he was holding her and taking her, she said, Your Holiness, we pray for your good health and long life. He stopped. He said, I believe in science. So I had my DNA checked. So the scientist told me I will live, and he named a figure which is very reassuringly far away. He said, in any case, longer than Chinese communism. So we can.
Frankly speaking, it is quite, I think I believe that the artificial sort of the system, their own people now losing faith. So only, and North Korea also, I think Korean people, because of their leaders' fear, they completely sort of distorted the information. And countryside, very poor. So the lack of information, therefore people do not know what's the reality, what's outside world. So one occasion, say, one flight from Chengdu to Lhasa. In that flight, one Chinese officials, another Chinese businessman, and some Tibetan also there. So later we heard some talks between these two, one Chinese businessman, one Chinese official. Then the official criticized Tibetan refugee, in particular in Dalai Lama. Then the Chinese businessman, who have sort of experienced visit different part of the world, he argued, Dalai Lama, not that bad. Dalai Lama is a very wonderful person. Mm-hmm. So all these, closed society, no sort of because of realistic information, just closed. So this cannot remain a long period. The world is changing. So therefore, I feel, however, Marxism is concerned, I feel, economy theory, among different economy theory, Marxist economy theory, there are some element of compassion. When Western world industrialized, I think working class people sort of, they are right, much sort of, controlled in handful, capitalist. So, Karl Marx, the sense of concern of these working class people, they are right. Working class people, needy people, and they are majority. So Karl Marx theory, developed against bourgeois or these things. So, as far as socio-economy theory is concerned, I'm Marxist. I prefer Marxism or socialism much better than capitalism. I really feel. However, Lenin, I think, spoiled. He, more concerned about political power, totalitarian.